everybody, it is Quicken, and I'm coming to you from my apartment, and I'm coming to you with natural light. So I wanted to make a video today about just like my apartment hunting experience. This is going to be a little more casual, not necessarily like a step-by-step on how to find apartments in a city, but basically just me sharing my experience and one rather weird experience I had, just as a way to like talk to you guys and not necessarily like wiki how to find apartments in a city. So I'm just gonna jump right in. It is a little more casual, but I don't know, it's kind of like how I would rather be approached if I was looking for apartments. So I'll kind of just include some of the things I did and some of the tricks I was mindful of. I guess tips. There's no trickery involved, but I'll kind of tell you guys how I found my apartment. When I decided concretely that I was having feelings about moving out, the first thing I did was get my finances in order. Ever since I worked at a coffee shop a couple years ago, I started a savings account, and my savings account has always been with emergencies in mind. So I had a savings account that I was pretty secure of, and then with that I was more mindful of the stuff that drained my everyday expenses and really just tried to take account for what kind of budget I was working with. I think that a realistic budget is going to be your best friend in all of this. And by realistic budget, I don't mean like, oh, I could afford that. I mean like, oh, I can comfortably afford that. I used a couple different websites primarily when I was looking for apartments. I didn't want to like solely rely on using the internet. So I was, keeping my eye open for places in my neighborhood that had like for rent signs, or Googling places that I always wanted to live. And basically a lot of that, I had a lot more pitfalls doing that, like the old-fashioned way, like looking at the newspaper and stuff, versus looking online. Honestly, and not to like call myself a millennial, but I think apartments we can afford are listed online. There was kind of a period of time where I had this like crazy budget in mind, where I was like, I bet I could afford that. But if you are like me and you are planning to live alone, you have to account for everything. You have to pay for the internet in its entirety, your phone bill, your grocery bill, and then, little things like if you have a gym membership, if you have other little monthly expenses, Xbox Live, is that expensive? Stuff like that. You can find different websites that like allow you to search through budget. This isn't sponsored, but I primarily use the website Zillow to look for apartments in my area. You can drag the search feature to search by neighborhood or price range. You can select crime rates, and you can also select like if you can bring pets or whatever. And I knew I was bringing my cat, and you'd be like really surprised that like kind of cut my search in half, which was like kind of disappointing. When I initially was like daydreaming about moving out, it was originally just a thought, and then it was like a thought that consumed all of my other thoughts. And then I was just like looking at apartments online, and then while I was at work, I was like daydreaming that I lived in the apartments, and it just like became really obvious to me that like searching online and all this stuff like had to become like a real thing. Originally, I wanted to live kind of near the other shampoo girls at my job because I wanted to live like in a support system. I originally wanted to live in the same exact building as Angela. You may know her. She is in the water club. She's on my Instagram story every single day. I originally wanted to live in her building, but everything in that price range was about $1,000, and it just wasn't something that I could in the long run sustain. So that, unfortunately, was like one of my first pitfalls, because it was like, could I afford that for like more than 3 months? Like, I don't think so, because you may be able to afford rent, but Then you're like, what about electric? What about water? What about gas? What about internet? And all those things pile up, and you have to decide exactly how you want to live, and you need to decide exactly what things you need to live with. When I couldn't afford to live in Angela's building, I wanted to live in the same neighborhood. And there was a lot of cool buildings, like there is a whole like loft studio building that is kind of close to her, and it was really cool because it has a gym, it has like a lobby, it has a guy or person, like a lobby person, that way you could get packages and someone's always there to sign for it. That's something I really wanted, like being a YouTuber, to have packages delivered somewhere safe. But even though that was like kind of pushing my price range, it was a studio apartment. And a studio apartment is kind of one big square room that everything is in, except for your bathroom, which is usually tucked somewhere. I kind of thought, that could be really interesting. I watched other like apartment tour videos of bigger YouTubers who lived in these like studio lofty kind of things. But ultimately I decided like I didn't want my bed to be anywhere near like where I prepare food or anything like that. And a lot of that goes back to, and you've probably heard me say it 1,000 times on this channel, my friend Mike King, he does comics, he is amazing. He has like taught me everything I know about like creative work ethic, and he's always said that you cannot create to your full potential where you sleep. And it's hard because I've been working, like shooting, working, editing, and sleeping all in the same room for the last 3 years. And I was like, with that in mind, I was like, I need to change how I live, and I need to change my experience. And although like I could afford to live in like a studio lofty kind of thing, I was like, what kind of living experience would it be like? Currently my cat lives in one bedroom, and I was like, for his sake and for my sake, like, I don't know. So I saw this like loft kind of studio apartment in West Philly, and I saw it on Craigslist and Zillow. And it was like kind of in my price range, all new construction, something I was like looking forward to. I wanted like something nice and clean. And the building said that the whole building came with Wi-Fi. And I was like, ooh, Wi-Fi is going to be one of my bigger expenses. So I called to make an appointment to look at the apartment. And I went out there one morning to check it out, and it was already such a dud. So I went there and I was like, hey, I'm 27 years old. I'm like actually 26, but I was like, hey, I'm 27 years old. Like, I noticed this apartment building is new and it's near the university. I was like, I don't want to live with like any frat boys. Like, I don't want any parties. Like, I'm old. I am old and I work from home primarily. And he was like, oh no, like no parties, like nothing like that. And I was like, okay, like, because I don't want to waste your time before I walk in and take a tour. And like I said, you have to know what you want. And all that might not be clear until you see what you don't want. But for me, I was like, silence. I want silence. And Wi-Fi. And laundry. So he was giving me a tour, and the front of the building was really cool. Lots of like unique digital upgrades, like a keypad to get in if you didn't have your key, or like you wanted to like tell your friend the keypad so they could come in. And he said from your cell phone you could like look outside and all this stuff from like Bluetooth. And I was like, cool. So we go inside and it just like smells like weed, like 1,000% stinks like weed, like, and like that's not like, that's whatever to me, but I'm like, I smell it in the hallway. So he showed me this second floor studio, and it had these big windows, which was like on my list, like natural light was on my list, and that was it. It was like a room the size of here, basically, the size of my living room. And the kitchen was just like a little panel right up against the wall with like a mini fridge underneath, and then a counter space with like a hot plate countertop. And then like a cabinet and like a little sink. And then that was it. And then the rest was just an open floor plan, and then that was it. And then behind the kitchen space was a wall with a shower stall, a shelf, and a sink and a toilet. And immediately when I walked in, I was just like, I can't live like this. I can't live in this one only bedroom and have friends over, which was something I really wanted. Have my cat live comfortably, something I really wanted. And, you know, like, not be on top of his litter box. And when he showed me the bathroom, big, huge watermark on the ceiling. And I was like, what's that? And he was like, oh, I'm having the guy look at it today. And I was like, what guy? I don't know. So he showed me the hallway, and there was a washer and dryer that I guess would just be mine because there was one on each floor. It just isn't in the apartment. TG, like, nothing else could fit in that apartment. So I was thinking, like, I could get a Murphy bed, which is the bed that folds up into the wall. And then it was like, and then have, like, a livable, tangible space. Because I was like, I like the new construction, but what the fuck? So immediately that's when I knew, like, I couldn't live in, like, a studio apartment. So we exit the room, and you hear someone fighting with their boyfriend. Like, really loud, like, screaming, like, F word and all this stuff. And then I'm just like, and the guy showing me the tour is like completely ignoring it. So I'm like, what's that? And he's like, oh, she's new. I don't know what that's about. And I was like, oh, like, she has only lived here for like 2 days and she's fighting with her boyfriend. And why did she think her and her boyfriend could live in like 300 square feet? And he was like, I just want to assure you that we do extensive background checks, and she must have slipped through the cracks. And I was like, you can be a good person and fight really dramatically with your boyfriend and clearly smoke weed 24 hours a day. So right then and there, I was like, I can't live in an environment like this. I'm really sorry. And he was like, okay, like, I have other buildings I can show you. And I was just like, no, I'm okay. And he was like, one of the gentlemen who live in the other buildings, he works for American Airlines. And I was like, that's cool. My paychecks say Google on them. It doesn't mean I work for Google. Like, he could do anything for American Airlines. He lives in a loft apartment. A studio apartment. Or maybe he's a minimalist. So even that was, like, a red flag to me. Like, why is the landlord guy, like, still calling me, trying to, like, convince me that the building didn't stink like weed and that the girl wasn't, like, yelling with her boyfriend at 9 o'clock in the morning. I saw the apartment before work. So I was just like, if I had to live in a coffin and it was, like, really loud in there and smelling like a party at 9 o'clock in the morning, no. And, like, even now, like, this building smells like weed, like 100%, but she had her apartment door open. Like, that's a little weird. This isn't, you know, sorority house. This is, like, adults participating in whatever they want to, you know. So after, like, I felt really defeated seeing an apartment, like, I was like, I wasted my time, this guy won't stop calling me, whatever. It was a good trial run to, like, see an apartment and see exactly what I didn't want. And even that apartment was out of my budget realistically anyway, and it was so small. So I kind of knew that if I lived in West Philly again, it would really kind of put me in a situation where I was really far from my support system, far away from work, and I felt like it would kind of isolate me, especially if it seemed like I wasn't going to get along with the people in my building, and it, like, all the people I used to live with in West Philly don't live there anymore. So I went back to look at stuff in more central Philadelphia, and, you know, you look at the apartments nonstop, and they have things you like, and they have things that you don't like, and you have to consider what you want. Like, I saw a really cool apartment downtown that had awesome views. The whole apartment was white, something I liked. I was allowed to bring Ethan. It had a lobby, so it had a desk person to receive packages, but the entire apartment didn't have storage. It didn't have any closets. I would have to get all dressers, all bureaus, stuff like that, like come up with some really unique storage situations. And then there were just like apartments where it was just your bedroom and there was no living room. And that kind of led me to and then one girl I worked with was giving up her apartment, which, you know, I had really planned on moving into that apartment, but she said that she had some trouble with mice and that her bathroom, it was like her bathroom and you had to walk through it and then it was the bedroom, which really isn't a problem to me. That's how I was living anyway. But I was kind of just thinking, like, with the mice and stuff, I'm not really sure. And then that rent was just like a touch out of my range as well. So then I found the apartment I saw before this one. And I was like really geared up. I really liked the neighborhood and it was right below my price range. So I was like, nice. I can rent this apartment, have Wi-Fi, have a phone, and take Ethan out for a nice dinner. So the guy had 3 apartments. The one I saw was right underneath public transportation. We have an elevated train line, the L. It's like a subway above ground. And that was right by the L. And I looked up the address and did like Google View, and it was like open the window and you could throw your trash on the train tracks. That close. So, and then that was like a little bit above my price range as well. So then he had one that was below, and then I didn't know about this one. So I went and saw the first apartment and it just like broke my heart. It was a ground floor apartment, which I didn't want, just because, you know, I am living alone and it is my first time living alone, and I really just didn't want to be on the ground floor. You know, there's a lot of benefits to having the ground floor. Some ground floor apartments have access to the basement. Ground floor means you can make all the noise you want. You could play DDR, like, but ground floor also means that the windows are street level. And I was just like, with this neighborhood, girl. So, when he showed me the ground floor apartment, it had really tall ceilings, stuff I liked, had a nice little kitchenette kind of thing, just right up against the wall. And then it had a bedroom, which you could walk through a door to get to, no hallway. You just open the door from the living room, and then it was the bedroom, you close the door, you're in it. And then it had a stall, shower, and a sink and toilet. So, you know, I don't know if he noticed, but I just, in my mind, I was like, great, this is what I can afford. This is awful. I hate this. But this is what I can afford. This sucks. And it makes you think about, like I have friends who live in New York City who live really expensively in really, really, really small spaces, and they're thankful because they can live in New York. And I was like, if this is what it takes for me to stay in Philadelphia and live here without roommates, then this is what it is. Because I just figured, like, living with roommates and having my YouTube schedule might be hard because I like having access to the house and doing like cool things on YouTube, and I just like know that this is what I want to pursue. And I felt like it's kind of selfish or like a leap of faith, like I'm gonna live by myself so I can make YouTube videos. But that's what it was. So after that apartment, I was like, sorry, I can't live in this space. And he was like, well, I have 2 more apartments. And I was like, yeah, I saw the one under the L. I can't live in that apartment. He was like, the L doesn't run 24 hours a day. And I was like, good joke. And he was like, well, I have 1 more apartment that I haven't listed yet. I can show it to you, but one other person is interested. So I was like, please fucking show me that apartment. And it was this one. So he showed it to me, and immediately I was like, oh my god, it's like in my price range. And it has a kitchen, it has a bedroom, it has a bit of a hallway, so a little bit of distinction between living spaces. It had a tub, which is something I really like. Sometimes I just like to soak in all my tears. So it was just all stuff I really liked. It had a lot of windows, that was one of the things I wanted, and I could bring Ethan, my cat. So I took a week to think about it, and then I told him yes. It was a little bit difficult at first because I do, like, my income is from YouTube, and YouTubers, not that you're hearing this for the very first time, but YouTubers are paid based on views. So my pay is really inconsistent from month to month. Some months, around Halloween, I made 16 videos that month. But then, in January, I may have only made 4 or 5. So all of that is really inconsistent. And when he was like, oh, I just need some pay stubs and blah, 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 I was like, oh, yeah, no pay stubs. But after talking to him, he was really cool about it. He said, like, him and his wife both watch YouTube videos and that he's, like, really into ASMR and all that stuff. So being able to provide him with, like, the little bit of income, like, proof I could, all worked out. And then I got this space. From then, I put the electricity in my name, and then that was pretty easy. I just called the electric company with the address, and they turned it on. And then, I don't know if this is in every state or city, but the electric company also works with the cable company. So while I was on the same phone call with the electric company, they transferred me to the cable company. I didn't get cable, but they do the Wi-Fi. And then the Wi-Fi guy came the very next week. So I would say that finding my apartment probably took about 2 months. And that was with a lot of, like, back and forth and finding things that were way above my budget, but they were what I wanted. And then also finding things that were, like, just wouldn't work for me. And that was really hard. Definitely let me know in the comments, like, what kind of stuff you look for in your living space. If it's a bathtub, if it's a living room, if it's not being on the ground floor, if it's windows. Because, at first I didn't think I was asking for too much. And then I would see houses, like, full-on houses that I could afford. But they were in sketchy neighborhoods. And I was like, well, do you want to live in a good neighborhood? Do you want to live in a sketchy neighborhood? Or do you want to live, like, somewhere in between? Which is, like, where I am. And you kind of just have to decide what that means to you. Because I'll talk to people who live in sketchy neighborhoods and who love it, but most of the time they have roommates, and with roommates I would live anywhere. But living with roommates is also another kind of full-on process. And, in my apartment search, I did originally look at, like, a couple houses that had roommates, or, like, situations where I would live on, like, a certain level of the home. And I looked at that, and even those were too, like, some of those were out of my price range as well, which I was like, that's crazy. I had to get to know you and live in your established household and follow your rules for $1,300. You're mad. So, I don't know. Like, would it have been great if there was a front desk person, or a lobby, or a gym, or Wi-Fi? Like, yeah, some people can afford that, and that's awesome. But for me, like, on paper, you figure out what you can afford, and what you can afford if something goes wrong, and what you'll have wiggle room, and how much things cost, and how much your food costs. And once you get that realistic number, if it's $450, if it's $7, if it's $1,000, like, you really have to stick with it and then really find something in your price range. Because, if I would have went with the loft, with the weed, and the crazy girl, like, yeah, first 4 or 5 months, like, yeah. But then your 6th month, your 7th month, when the quality of your life starts to drain because you're putting everything into your rent, yeah, you can afford that rent, but you can't afford anything else. And that's kind of just been my like little apartment search journey. Let me know in the comments like what your apartment search journey has been, because this is the very first time I've ever lived alone. You know, I was talking to somebody and they were like, oh, it's such a difference with like millennials, like it used to be I would show apartments to like a single guy or a single girl, and now I show apartments to their parents and they're 26 years old. And I was just like, yeah, what's wrong with that? Sometimes like we need reassurance. Looking for apartments by myself was really scary because it was really hard to even tell that guy like I can't live here cuz it's out of control. But yeah, let me know. Thank you guys so much. I'm so excited to bring you content like this and kind of just talk about my apartment search and everything. My foot's asleep. But yeah, let me know what kind of videos you want to see, because this was definitely a requested video and I'd love to share my journey so far. I got a little bit of furniture and I have the Wi-Fi now, and things are pretty cool. So yeah, thanks for watching. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if it's your first time here. I'll leave my other apartment videos in the description down below. And until next time, bye!